Okay, today we're going to talk about adding figures or animals to a landscape where we have a definite landscape in mind and we want to think about inserting something in there that's a bit more of a stronger center of interest. Not necessarily taking over the landscape. This one it does. This is a painting by Henrik van Zugel, early 20th century. Here it's pretty much the horses and the figure with the landscape very, very secondary. How he draws the animals and or figure in there in terms of big mass of positive and negative shape. So when he's drawing these horses, he's not starting, with a brush or charcoal on the canvas and slowly outlining till he gets it right. For one thing, this might have been a quick study outside of the horses, or had drawings he did of the horses and inserted them, added a landscape around them. I don't know how he did it. Probably didn't use much photography at all. But he didn't start with outline. What you do is you start with the idea that the horses or figures or animals, they're vertical upright shapes like trees. So against the landscape, they're generally going to be darker, even though these are white horses and there might be a spot or two on them that are pretty light. They are generally darker than the background and or the surrounding landscape. So picking a darker value, whether it's this value here or a value on the shadow of the horse, and what you want to do is with a fairly big brush, not too big, just start scribbling and gesturing in the shape. And don't worry about being very accurate, because you won't be. You're trying to gradually feel the shape in there. So you might start somewhat like this, even if you start with a big square. Then you take the background color, or if you're drawing this in the beginning, before you start the color, then just take a brush with a little paint thinner on it and you start wiping out. Or again, if you've done the landscape first and you're adding the animal or figure on top of the dry landscape, then you're taking the background color and you're cutting in. Then you go back to the dark again. Again, you have your reference there and you can refine it a bit more. Maybe a little bit of outline at some point to refine the drawing, but outline is not going to get it. It's these masses that are going to get it. We'll get the correct drawing, correct proportion. Then you can start doing the lights, some lighter shadows, gradually paint into that darker figure. And that's what we want to practice on. Whatever landscape you have, just to insert more of a focal point, a figure or some kind of animal, or even a tractor for that matter, or a car, you approach it the same way. You want to see it in terms of mass instead of detail and outline. So moving on here, I've got a couple of paintings by Carl Rungus, early 20th century. And he practiced painting wildlife by going out and shooting them and then setting them up and just practice drawing and painting them. Didn't rely much on photography, although I think he did use some. But he would go out, mostly Wyoming, Montana, and then Canada, and paint these landscapes, really nice landscapes, very accurate value-wise, nice color, and then go back home to the studio and do them bigger and insert the wildlife in there. This is another one. I don't think it's a color sketch you did outside. This looks like more finished studio landscape without an animal. But he would travel and do a lot of landscapes, come home, do them bigger, and insert the animals. Again, seeing these sheep more as a big mass first, kind of like a silhouette. Get not the darkest accent, but maybe this value here, and just fill in the whole shape of the animal. Then add the lights, then the halftone, and last, if you want some detail. He does detail some of them pretty extensively. But this is another real nice landscape. They're always well composed. I've seen pictures of his drawings where he had all kinds of compositional angles set into his drawings to figure out good composition. But the landscape that he did outside, brought it back to the studio, did it bigger, and inserted an animal. And you can see the moose. You squint down at it, it's just a big dark shape against the lighter sky. And he's after contrast there because that's more the focal point. So that makes it easier also. But you would mask this in with one value. the dark. Then gradually add lights and then halftones. Of course, then some detail if you want it. And here's another one here. Again, really nice landscape with the moose out of there. It always has the darkest darks on the focal point here. And the lightest lights. May not be as light as the sky, though I think it is lighter. But just being a stronger color than the sky makes it stand out more from the sky. But that's what we're going to focus on here. There's another one with moose in there. Doing a landscape, or the landscape is very important, a big part of it. And then the focal point being figures, animals, or a little of both. So what we're doing here, this is a scene in Tucson, in the Catalina Mountains. And I usually go out in the evening, early morning where the sun is low like this. But I'll bring them home to the studio, or I'll also do color sketch. Bring it home and with sketchbook really work out the composition. And compositionally, it's too big. There's too much in there. Too much of this cactus too. I'll probably cut that down a little bit or make this one a little bigger and then make this one smaller. But compositionally, it would work better if the tallest object, biggest object, as far as the cactus go, is more within the picture plane instead of too far to the side. Because I also want to crop this down. I'm going to cut off some of the cactus over here on the left because I want more of the mountains in the background. And that makes a little bit of composition. Again, I would make this cactus here on the left smaller and make this one a little bigger. In fact, I might get it a bit more of a square. I think would work a little bit better. The mountains are going to be the focal point as well as the cactus, or the strong point. Focal point will be a figure that I want to add in here. And if I find the center, where the center of the canvas or my drawing is, then I want that off center. And I either want it above the middle line. Middle line is probably more down here, but I want either above it or below it. It's going to be below it. It's going to be a figure right in here, just off center on a horse. And this is the figure right here. And there's several ranches around here that let me, when they're working, let me on to photograph. Do some drawing, but they're always moving pretty quickly. I do try and do a lot of drawing and painting of horses from life. Once they're tied up, they pretty much stay in the same 2 to 3 poses. They keep going back to those poses. And that's really good practice. But I really learned a lot about how to simplify the shape and simplify the values on there. And that's what purpose of it is. But using this figure here, and I want him off center a little bit. And when I put him in, and he's going to be small enough that I would put him in after the landscape is pretty well blocked in. Doesn't have to be finished, but blocked in. I got rid of a lot of the shrubbery here, a lot of the extra cactus, kind of opened that space up a little bit. Did this on several thumbnail drawings first, but I would just pick a dark value. A lot of times when I'm drawing like that on a dry painting, I'll just use blue and a little burnt sienna, or burnt sienna and a little blue, either one. And just mass in that dark. And usually it's not very accurate. The figure gets too big, or the horse is too big or too small. So I have to keep going back and forth, or I keep it the dark until you get a shape in there, and it won't be right. So that's when you come back with the background. See, I'm just using the background color, and I'll have a pile of this background color and a pile of the drawing color sitting there, so I don't have to mix every few minutes. I just got a pile of it. But just keep going back and forth with the positive shape of the horse and figure, the negative shape. Now I'm getting the figure a little bit bigger. And again, just keep judging proportions. Still had the figure too big. I didn't realize it yet. But it's just don't worry about perfection. I know it's not going to be right proportion till I finally go back and forth quite a few times to get the shapes and proportions right. Then I can start massing in darks. In this case, the light's coming from the left. Actually, when I took this picture, the light was coming from the right, so I put it in Photoshop and just flipped it horizontally so the light's coming from this side. I'm usually photographing early morning, late afternoon. So I do have a lot of strong light, either from one side or the other. So it's not a big deal to flip it and get the light coming from the right direction. But I'm starting with the darks, and again, keep it as simple as possible. And by that, I mean I want either just a simple dark or a simple light. Right now, I've decided to make the shirt red, or the jacket. So I have a dark kind of red-orange, a dark blue with a little burnt sienna, or burnt sienna with a little blue, just to get a dark horse in there. Keep it very simple until the proportions are all right. Then I can start with the lights, and you can see I just chopped in the shapes of the light. It's so much easier to draw when you reduce everything concerning this torso just to a simple dark or light shape, using the background to cut into it to make the shape a little bit. But you can see I'm not going to add the light till I get this torso the right shape. And I'm not thinking too much that, there's a shoulder here and an elbow there and spine's going this way. It's a lot easier. I mean, it helps to know somewhat about anatomy, but just to be able to look at the reference or the model and see the mass instead of outline. Too often we spend way too much time outlining. But then adding the light on the face, dark hair, light on the hat, dark hat, and light and dark of the kind of red-orange jacket there. There's a lot of green here, so the red-orange would stick out a little bit more. And these are more tertiary colors. The greens are blue-green in the background, yellow-green in the hills in the sunlight. And then the figure is red-orange in the light and red-orange in the dark. So it's more tertiary colors. I really wouldn't want a bright red shirt and a bright green grass or cactus. Tertiary colors that, again, yellow-green, blue-green, red-orange, yellow-orange, red-violet. Those are better colors in nature. They're a lot more natural looking than getting colors too primary or too secondary. And then add on top of that a little bit of the complement to gray it slightly. Makes it work a lot better. Then going into the horse and just adding, I have a dark in there, but these are the real dark accents. And then the sunlight on the chaps there. And then the shadow in the sunlight. I've got 3 values in the chaps, a light, a dark, and a halftone. Always start with the dark and the light, then add the halftone. I could add a little halftone in the figure, but I don't know that I would, even in the painting. Now, when I paint it, it'll be wet and wet. So I'll be creating some halftone just by putting the light overlapping the dark a little bit. That creates a bit of a halftone. I can't do that on the computer, but that sets up the light. And the simpler you can keep that, the better. The more you mess around, if we go to the figure here, the more you mess around with this subtle halftone, like right in here, right in there, and you start messing around in the darks, pretty soon you're going to lose that strong dark and light. So keep that in mind. You want to keep things very simple. The most important thing is suggesting the light. Too much halftone, I'm going to lose the light. So I tend to wait till the end to come in later and maybe scrub a little bit of a halftone, or after the figures or the figure and the horse is all blocked in real well. Now, same thing with the horse here. I've got the dark, so now I'm just adding the light. Simple, dark, and light. Don't overthink it. Don't overdo it. A little bit of halftone here. Well, actually, this is the lighter value, so that this is the dark and the halftone is what that is. And the halftone is on the light side. Now I just go lighter. Or I could say, this is the light and the shadow, and then here's the highlights. That would probably be a bit more accurate. Some of the highlights on real dark surfaces, especially horses, can get kind of bluish. They get cooler, even though it's caused by the sunlight to get that light. And then the more I work on it, the smaller the details. The color on the blanket. With horse and riders, that's where a lot of color is in that blanket in there, in the reins and so on. Then as far as the foreground goes, I want to cut through this clutter in here. So I want to create not too obvious a path, like it's been, a trail has been cut in there, but I do want to kind of cut away at some of the rocks and shrubbery, because I'm trying to create lines and shapes that lead you to the figure. So that would be coming in here and winding around, or coming up this way and winding around, maybe having another arm there that kind of points to the figure. But a lot of different ways to kind of get to the figure there compositionally without being too obvious. It's just so easy to be way too obvious and over-designed painting. But simplify these shrubbery a lot. Simplifying these rocks, again, just more of a simple dark and light than creating maybe a lighter shadow on the top. But the simpler I can keep that, the better. Now, looking at this, I do have him off-center a little bit. Somewhere in there. He's just off-center. And I don't mind that placement there. And I had to get the figure in proportion to the cactus, so I couldn't get the figure any bigger. But the landscape is real important. I really like, more than anything, the rocks back in here, the sunlight and shadow on the cactus. The figure is almost secondary, although it is the focal point, because that's what your eyes are going to go to, is that figure. But the landscape here is very important. And again, the eye can wind around and come back down. So setting things up to make the composition work. I eliminated some of the arms, a lot of the extra cactus. Could have a cactus or two back in here since they are everywhere. Even where something is real obvious, like this is the Sonoran Desert, so there's going to be a ton of cactus. That doesn't mean you have to paint them. You know, pick 3 or 4 or pick 3 to 5, but eliminate most of them. There's probably 60 cactus just on this hill alone. And I'm not going to paint them. They're just, I have no interest in them. I do like these because without these tall cactus, these lines here in the mountains just run off the canvas. So these are great barriers. Keep these vertical or horizontal lines from just running off the canvas. So picking a subject that I know I can add something. I like the shadow in the foreground, sunlight in the background or middle ground, and then shadow and sunlight in the background. Really breaks it up, creates a lot of drama. And you can get that anywhere, not just Southwest. It's the time of day that matters. Now this is another figure, and again I flipped him also. He is in Wyoming. Going to add him to another Wyoming scene here. It has that kind of shadow in the foreground, breaks it up, a lot of strong contrast. Not that every painting is going to have a shadow in the foreground, but when you're out painting and photographing early morning, late afternoon, you're going to have big areas of dark and light, create more contrast. Cropped it quite a bit. It's just too big and expansive. So zoomed in and crop it. I did a couple of things. I cropped it more like that to zoom in a little bit more. Again, you got the figure off center. Now the figure's really small here. Everything is real small. The mountains, again, like the last one, are the big, massive shapes here. And I went ahead and pulled some of the darks in the mountains together a little bit more to create bigger shapes. I might even do it a bit more just to create the, like taking this shadow, and I could just create a bigger, massive shapes. To me are always much more interesting than smaller little shapes. Now I got to have them fit in there pretty good. But so again, the eye follows them and goes around the landscape. But I did the same thing here. Started with this, again, blue, burnt sienna with a little blue on top of dry paint, and just with thin paint, scrub in that shape. Even if I start with just a square of that dark, fill that in. I wouldn't want to be that obvious, but I could take the background and then cut in, just like a sculpture chopping on a piece of marble, just kind of cut out the figure. That is much easier to do than to draw outlines. Because when you do an outline on a figure, what you're doing is you're just looking at the outside edge of everything. You're not looking at big mass. You're not seeing proportions. So if I can scribble, just gesture, if I'm doing it with a piece of charcoal, I'm putting charcoal down on the paper or canvas, and don't lift it up. Just keep scribbling. Kind of looking at the subject and scribble in the shape. And same thing with the brush. Paint on the brush and just put it down on the canvas. Don't lift it up and just mass it in. Then get the background color, or again, if you're drawing this before you start the color, you just get a wet brush with a little paint thinner and cut into it. But this is small enough that I would draw this on top of the almost finished landscape. But have a good idea of where it's going to be so I can adjust things. But starting with this dark for the whole horse and figure, and then going back and forth with the background, horse and figure until I get the big silhouette right. And really look at the proportions of how big the head is, big the torso is compared to the horse's neck. Sometimes I'll use the neck, the horse's neck, as a guide or a line of measurement. So from here to here, where the neck meets the torso, that's a measurement. And I'll see sometimes it'll be the same measurement from here to there. Not always, not so here. But at least I'll use that as a measurement and see where it comes to. So he would be like 2.5 horses high, or whatever it is. It's just a measurement to kind of check things after you get the drawing in there. I don't start with a bunch of measurements. I start with going after the shape, cutting into it with the background. Then I can measure it to see where I'm at. But much better way to add figures or animals. Then I took this cow right here on the left, and I would get rid of him, and I turned him this way. I painted this one in because I don't want something like a cow facing out. It just pulls the viewer away. This one does too. So I might change him. I might angle him back a little bit. But I'm forcing that one in. And I might leave him like that. But I don't want this one way over on the edge, pulling your eye away, and then having the cow look out of the picture plane also hurts it quite a bit. Added the dog in there. But again, more of that dramatic light with the figure adding a little more of a focal point to it, or a little more interest. But here's another one here. Another one that's in Wyoming. Way too long, way too much stuff going on. So to crop it, that would make it much more interesting. I would probably move the figure, same figure, just move him right in here. Just to get him away from that edge a little bit. I'm way far away from the center, so I don't have to worry about that. But I just want him moved in just a bit. But I would treat these cows the same way after getting the landscape pretty well blocked in. Although I'd leave space for the cows, in no sense doing too much painting underneath. Although you could, if it's dry, you could still put it on there afterwards. But I would mass in this whole shape. Again, looking at proportions, how much shape is in here, how much width to this big dark area compared to maybe down here or this area up in here. And then start using the grass and cutting into it. Cut into it to reveal some legs, cut in over here, and then go back to the cows again, this whatever dark, blue and burnt sienna, probably this value and color right here. Maybe pull that out, pull this out, get the grass again, and start looking for negative space between the legs. So for a long time, just big shapes of dark and light, and gradually break it down smaller and smaller. Because if you approach it that way, it's going to look a lot better than if you outline 12 cows here. I mean, it would just get real stiff, out of proportion, hard to deal with. I also want to keep the values just to a simple light and dark. Light and dark. Then maybe, after everything is blocked in, add a little bit of halftone, but be careful with that halftone. You'll lose your sense of light. This is more of a hazy day than a real strong sunlit day, but there's still strong sunlight on it, or strong separation or contrast between the values. Same thing with these deer, or not deer, elk. I would mask these two together, and I'll probably lose one, either this one or that one. And I might move this one in just a bit, because I don't want equal amounts, the same size of elk, 4 of them. So I have 3 or 5. Now the small one here is different, it's smaller. I also might take one elk and move him this way. And when I do that, when I take one of my references, and what I do is I crop that, put it in Photoshop, and I flip it. But I would want to flip it so that it's facing the other way. The light's kind of cloudy daylight, so it's coming straight down. So I could do that. I could flip one and not worry about the lighting being different. But I'd crop this also. It's just too big. I really like the values and the atmosphere as the values get lighter. There's kind of a fog, early morning setup going here. This does have, it's all the same value, this flat plane, the grass. So I'd get a stronger yellow ochre with a little bit of crimson in it and white. So it gradually gets stronger as it comes forward. It's a little flat right here. But again, the idea is to add something and then to be able to simplify it. The more simple you can keep these shapes or animals or figures you add, the better. The more you want to pick away at it, the worse it's going to look. When you look at landscape painters that add figures, they're always kept really, really simple.